All right. Welcome back to the Valhalla Movement Podcast, where I'm clearly not in my studio right now, and you can kind of see that I'm somewhere different. I'm actually here at the beautiful pad and new podcast studio of Jason Silva, who is my guest here today. And we are in the beautiful city of Amsterdam. Now, I've had the beautiful pleasure of just spending the last few days with you, rolling around. I even got battle wounds to show for it that I just got this morning. It was great. It was all my fault. It was totally my fault. But I got beautiful experience here in Amsterdam, and I'm so curious. Why Amsterdam? I mean, you're the kind of guy who travels all over the world. You've been, I met you in Toronto. We've met a few times at Tulum. There's magical places all over the place. But why Amsterdam?
Well, hi, Mark. Thanks for having me in this special edition of your podcast, and thank you for creating this sublime scaffolding for conversations. I've dreamed of having my own podcast studio, but kept deferring it because I was too lazy or unable to put all the pieces together. So your generosity in creating this is much appreciated.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And I really love this place. Maybe I'll kind of give you the whole backstory so that we sort of build retroactively to where I am now. I first came to Amsterdam as a college student in like 2001 or something like that, typically doing the Euro travel trains, and came with my buddy in between cities. I think we left London to here and then went off to Belgium. What we did, of course, was we ended up in the red light district, which
Of course.
is a novelty, but I don't really recommend it. It's sort of like, my opinion, kind of like
Not the nicest part of Amsterdam.
I mean, it's got again, people go there to take pictures because it's this like hallmark of tolerance, legalized prostitution, so on and so forth. But it's not my cup of tea. But as a college student, we were like, "What's up?" So we went there. We went to one of the famous coffee shops. Smoked a joint.
As one does in Amsterdam.
Indeed. But this is me at like 22 and like got way too stoned. Bad setting, bad environment, totally got a panic attack, totally thought it was laced. Then we like walked around the nasty red light district, which in our stoned, altered state of consciousness was even more nightmarish and dark. And then we ended up watching like some kind of like peep show type thing. And it just bad trip all around. Got on the train that night and said, I'm never coming back to this place. Cut to, from 2002 to 2012. 2012, my speaking career was just taking off. Brain Games was about to come out. I give my first paid talk in Dubai, and I wanted to come back through Europe. And fan of cannabis that I am, I told my brother, I was like, well, let's pass through Amsterdam. I haven't been there in 10 years. And instead of going to the red light district, this time we walked around different neighborhoods, including the Jordan and the canals, and just kind of the more charming elements of Amsterdam that when you first come, you don't really realize are there. And I kind of just like rediscovered it virginally. I sort of repaired the trauma of my first visit and then like fell in love with more of a soft fascination, if that makes sense. I started to be enthralled by the historicity of the city, by the canals, the bicycle infrastructure. So everyone in Amsterdam moves by bike. And after living in Los Angeles, living in Miami, living in cities where the car infrastructure had become, at least to me, psychologically oppressive, perpetuating a feeling of hypervigilance, like let's not kill someone, let's not be killed, let's not crash, like this was more like, obviously you fell off your bike, but in general.
But here's the thing: I fell off my bike when I didn't die.
Well, exactly.
If we had a car accident, it would have been, we wouldn't have just
much
picked
worse.
up and went to the media market and picked up some cables and shit and came back here. You know what I mean? It was a completely different experience.
Fair point. Yeah. And so you see women, you see children, you see like older people, younger people. I mean, you just see everybody, people in high heels riding bicycles, and I just realized that it was like the livability that it gives a city, that village quality of everybody cycling, charmed the pants off of me, psychologically speaking. Every time I saw one of these cargo bikes with a mother and her 3 little babies wandering around the canals, I was like, am I in a poem? Like literally, am I in a poem? And at the time, I was really starting to pay attention to just like the nature of feedback loops and how they shape our inner life. So it's like, I've talked about this before. Our thoughts shape our spaces, and our spaces return the favor. What we design designs us in turn. Set and setting, just like in psychedelic contexts. You choose your environment because you functionally become your environment. You're shaped by your environment. You're imprinted by your environment. And I was like, well, my career was moving in this certain direction, but like this place just kind of won my heart, and I kind of felt like, well, I want to spend more time here because it prompts me into delight continuously. Like the basic sense impressions I encounter in Amsterdam, like just kept just jolting me into like delightful micro reverie all day, every day.
I think that Europe has more of that. I mean, particularly Amsterdam. I haven't spent that much time in Europe in recent years, or post pandemic, let's say. But the idea of European lifestyle inherently is more friendly. Inherently is more communicative, and in my personal opinion, it is more. We were talking about this yesterday. Biomimic. It has a more of a biomimicry type of conduciveness, right? Like flowing through the streets of Amsterdam, and the design of the fact that there is existing bike infrastructure next to every road. There is really great metro systems. There's and there's even like free boats that we take to go across the canal or whatever it is to the next point. It has a completely different feeling. And then you said this, every time it's sunny outside in Amsterdam, it's a block party.
Yeah. I think, it's interesting you say that. You talk about the flow, and obviously they're masters of urban infrastructure. They constantly gets voted like best quality of life, best urban infrastructure in the world. I think Copenhagen is also like, they kind of compete for who has the better bicycle infrastructure. I think it also helps that these people invest a lot of money. They pay a lot of taxes in this country, but they invest a lot of money into the commons, into the public square. And so instead of the focus really just being like on what's yours and your private property, of course there's private property, of course there's rule of law, of course there's capitalism. These guys invented the stock market. They created New York. But there's also this emphasis on the we. There's this egalitarianism, there's the public square, there's the commons. And so people are hanging out in the public spaces, and there's less cars and more bikes. And so it just feels like humanity. Feels like human scale. It's built for people. And then you have of course the crisscrossing canals, which are just kind of an engineering miracle on top of that. And so the Dutch are used to working with water. And what does water do? Well, water flows. So I think that has like had an epigenetic effect in the sort of intuitive design principles that they abide by in this country, where they're like, well, water flows, so why shouldn't bikes flow? Why shouldn't people flow? Why shouldn't urban flow be effortless and, like you say, emergent? So it starts to look like nature, where things just flow, and it's just like, small basic rules that lead to all kinds of beautiful emergent complexity, and it's a marvel to watch. You watch some of these intersections with the cyclists, and you're like, how is people not crashing into each other? But it's incredible. Anyway,
it works out. It somehow works out.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of flow, one of the things that somebody who myself, I've been watching your content for many, many, many years. I've been exposed to your content. Both through Shots of Awe and kind of some of the stuff that you were doing, let's say on social media, Facebook, those kinds of things, but also through Brain Games, but also through different systems and different let's say mediums that you've used. Obviously, you, in my opinion, are the kind of guy who has a lot of flow. Now, somebody listening to some of your videos might think, oh, they're scripted, they're thought out ahead of time, they're the process of this is like maybe you're spending hours and hours and hours writing a script and then memorizing it, and maybe there's a teleprompter behind the camera, any of those different things. I would love for you to express to me how you enter a flow state. I've seen it. I've witnessed it. I mean, the last couple of days, I've taken the time to ride out in the middle of nowhere into a park and, lose a sense of time and kind of, like you said, you exit Chronos and enter Kairos. Exactly. So how is it that you create content? How is it that you create stories? Because I think you have a very interesting process and flow, and you're creating a container around it that is particularly interesting. And I don't think people realize that you're jamming. Yeah.
It's definitely, my creative process is more like jazz than anything else. It's like surfing. I remember once reading this Timothy Leary quote about, I guess what you might call the phenomenology of surfing, or like the subjective experience of surfing and why we love it so much. He says, your future is right in front of you. Your past is exploding behind you. Your footprints are being washed from the shore. It's a non-depletive, non-extractive act done solely for the pleasure of the act itself. And that is the destiny of man. And so again, that's kind of a poetic way of saying you're just in the moment. You're on the crest of the wave. And that's very similar to a jazz musician, getting into that flow state, getting into that pocket, and flow states are characterized by feelings of timelessness and effortlessness. All of this is happening. I remember reading this book about jazz and consciousness. I think I can't remember the guy's last name, but he described this experience where subject, object, and process become one thing. So if subject is me and object is either the instrument I'm playing or me speaking, and then process is the whole unfolding of that thing. It's like I'm using words, Jason, and the act of speaking is becoming one thing. So it definitely emerges for me when I sort of jump into this space. I arrived to realizing my love of I guess you call it spoken word. McKenna calls it ecstatic vocalization and empowered articulation. But
I would say it's also poetic in some ways.
Thanks.
I would add an element of poetry. There's some kind of poetry component to what you're doing that is an influence there.
Totally. And I arrived to it intuitively because it's not like I had read about flow states as a high school student, but it really happened in combination with my love of making videos, and since I was a kid, since I was like 12 years old, I've been making videos. But I used to get into kind of a flow behind the camera, just like directing. I didn't really turn the camera on myself and start flowing in conversation until I started to host these salons in high school. And my thing in high school was, I discovered alcohol, and it was like, okay, maybe I can do this responsibly, like at parties once in a while, because I enjoyed the exhilarating feeling of being uninhibited. And all of a sudden I had like what they call liquid courage, and I could be much more flirtatious with girls and whatnot. Sure. But I also discovered cannabis. I wrote an article in my high school newspaper, and I read a book called Marijuana Myths, Marijuana Facts, and just kind of discovered that cannabis had this rich history in the creative arts, poetry, jazz. Just musicians had used this compound, and its toxicity levels were non-existent. Nobody ever died from cannabis, and so on and so forth. And so that's when I first kind of woke up to the propaganda behind the drug war in general. And in any case, I made the case to my parents that I was like, well, I wrote this article. I'm really curious to try this cannabis thing. I was very serious about all of my experimentation.
I love how you made a paper for your parents to like pitch it. It's like, oh, hold on, I want to try this thing.
Yeah, I want to be responsible. Totally. Yeah. And I was one of those people that the first time I tried cannabis, it just like transported me instantly into a kind of waking dream state. That's how I describe it, where I was just like immediately. It doesn't, like David Lenson talks about this. It's not that it defeated the cognitive mechanism. Like it's not like my judgment disappeared. It's not like I acted irresponsibly. Yeah. But it without defeating the cognitive mechanism, it still shifted the way the world landed to my mind and to my senses, and now I sort of refer to this as like aesthetic consciousness, or like turning time, making time liquid, or like moving from Chronos to Kairos. But at the time, it was just like, is this a movie? Why does everything feel like a movie? and eventually, I was able to arrive into realizing the role of set and setting and the people that you were with, because you enter into a relational field and your sensitivity is massively heightened and your reactivity is massively boosted, and feelings of salience and increased meaningfulness permeate everywhere you beam your eyeballs. And so I realized immediately, I was like, oh man, so the right people, the role of curation, the role of music, it's like, man, have you listened to Pink Floyd? Okay, but have you listened to Pink Floyd high? Have you heard that meme? It's like, oh man, have you watched this movie? Yeah. But have you watched this movie high? Oh man, have you seen this movie trailer? But have you seen this movie trailer high? And so I started to just handpick my closest, most interesting friends, bring them together on Friday nights to my house, and we'd all get really high, and then we'd sort of play each other cool music and songs and movie scenes and so on and so forth. And the other thing we'd do is we'd interview each other, philosophizing.
You'd curate. You'd curate your environment and then test playing, like,
That's
and
right.
recording to some degree too.
Because the recording became this kind of it was like okay, we would all kind of catch a buzz, get in the zone, start laughing. We learned to trigger the reverie, to engender the laughter, the comedy, the so on and so forth. And then once we were in the looseness of that place, I found myself laughing uncontrollably. And it's like, at the end of a laughing fit, you may be many things, but one thing you aren't any longer is self-conscious, And so it was like we'd film each other, and I'd ask my friend ER, ER, how are you feeling right now? Or he'd put the camera on me, and there was such trust and such safety between us that it was like not awkward to put the camera on. We're stoned as hell. And, hey, ER, how are you feeling right now? And then you start to get playful with the improv because you're so loose. It's very different than being drunk, but it has a quality of just the holy fool. Like you're in the mood for not just being playful, but for being real silly. So then it would be like, hey, bro, how are you feeling right now as you surf the altered realms of being? Like, is your soul melting into other dimensions? Like, you start playing, like being exaggerated in your discourse, playful, absurd, and putting your friend on the spot and encouraging him to be playful and absurd in his answer. And so what it encouraged was, I think, a flexibility of an elasticity and a playfulness with language and with a boldness in playing with talking. And then what we would then afterwards go up to my media room that I happened to have, my own little media room. So my mom was really sweet. And we would then connect the camera to the big screen, and we'd watch playback of what we'd just recorded. And that was revelatory because I almost didn't recognize myself. And this goes back to me, is sort of my default being much more self-conscious, much more serious, much more like in my head, a cautious kid.
As the watcher, when you came back to watch it, all of a sudden your mindset had shifted, and now all of a sudden you were more judgmental of yourself?
No, it was the opposite. It was that in general, in my day-to-day life, I was extremely a serious, cautious kid.
Sure. Yeah.
Like vigilance first, checklist consciousness before I'm safe, before I can relax. And what was happening in those salons was that we were getting into these reveries where I was free of self-consciousness and becoming the life of the party in a way. Like I was just so playful, so not uptight as compared to how I normally was. So much more free. But then one thing is having the experience, and then you come down, you get sleepy, you go to sleep. Something else was the fact that we were making these videos, and then I was watching these videos later. So when we watch,
can judge them, you can see where it was funny, where it was different, where it landed, where it didn't.
That's right.
You could show it to other people and see their reaction.
Everything.
So you started going through what is basically an unofficial storytelling schooling of sorts. Like it's almost like you're in training of learning what eventually becomes your career, eventually becomes what, this is pre-social media, of course. This is pre all of these.
Imagine if there was YouTube back then. But here's where it was psychologically revelatory. Again, I was an extremely shy, self-conscious kid. I never got the girl that I liked. I always felt like she wasn't going to like me back. She often didn't like me back. Like I wasn't like smoking cigarettes with the cool kids after school. Like I was intellectual, but I liked hanging out with quirky, cool kids. I didn't like to hang out with like the scenesters. I never felt good with like the shallow and the super cool and the scenesters and the popular kids. I got along with them, but that wasn't my speed. So I just felt kind of awkward around that crowd. But what was interesting about seeing the footage of me free of that self-consciousness and inhibition, what was revelatory was I almost didn't recognize who I saw on the screen. But it's not that I didn't recognize them as in like, oh my God, that's not me. It was more like, fuck, is that me? Am I really that free? Am I really that relaxed? I don't feel that relaxed a lot of the time, or I don't think of myself as being that relaxed, but it's like, holy shit, like, So it wasn't just a dream. It wasn't just some reverie. It was, that really happened. And I sort of came across to myself much more confident and embodied than I felt myself to be in some weird way. So there was some kind of like object-subject duality collapsing in on itself, where it's like I embraced myself subjectively by seeing myself objectively. And that was the vigilant version of me having to make sure that whatever happened in those reveries, I could objectively watch later to make sure that I wasn't making a fool out of myself or being embarrassing or being absurd in a way
of or something.
whatever it was, unacceptable.
Yeah.
I would watch it and I was like, not only is that not unacceptable, that's who I want to be. I want to share this with the world. Now, at the time, it was like me and my friends, we would share those videos with each other. And I would show my mom, hey, look at this conversation we recorded last night. And again, it wasn't just me. It was me and my dear, close compatriots, all of us, were wonderful and eloquent and interesting and just we're fucking flaneurs, man. We were the Dead Poets Society, like full on. And that was like, that was like a teaching thing that created a reinforcing positive feedback loop.
Understood.
I would film, I would watch, I would film, I would let go, I would film, I would watch, I would let go, I would film, I would watch, I would let go. So that became the muscle memory.
I'm still doing it.
Exactly.
You're still doing it. Yeah. Now, let's talk about... Hit my mic over here. Need to get this dialed still. Okay, so let's talk about how that plays out here today. Is one of the things that, this podcast actually used to be called the Superhero Academy. And I actually built an online school out of making video podcasts in studios kind of like this. I mean, I've been...
And you're really fucking good at it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, I one of the things that I think made me understand why Superhero Academy and even starting podcasting was going to be super important to me in my career and was going to change the way I think and the way I operate was I really understood that we all have superpowers, number one. And sometimes, though, we're a little shy about our superpowers. And we almost need like an alter ego to essentially step in, right? So you think like one of my favorite movies, Fight Club, Tyler Durden, and the entire main character, which they never name. They call him Jack online, right? For those who read, but they never name the actual
name.
Well, Edward Norton never has a name.
Interesting.
They only talk about Tyler Durden and how this guy wants to be him.
Yeah.
But I believe that there's like this power in almost having an alter ego, in almost having a stage presence. It's almost like when you're creating your set and setting, what you're doing is saying, okay, I'm stepping into superhero mode.
Yes.
I'm going to go out into the middle of, in your case, you like to go into the park, you take a bike ride. That's why you love Amsterdam. So you go out there, you find the right joint with the right strain too. So it's not an indica, so it's not a body high, it's more of a mental. It keeps you, lucid to some degree verbally, let's say. All of those things create that perfect condition. And yesterday we were talking about that and the kind of womb space where all of a sudden when you're in that right environment,
for sure,
you feel protected. You're with somebody who you trust. You're with somebody who can film or shoot on the camera and capture the different elements of what you're doing. How important is that to you? And how do you recognize that as a superpower? Like, what would you say your superpower is, and how important is the set and setting for that superpower to come out?
Yeah, I love the using that metaphor of the superpower. I actually don't think it's a metaphor. I think it's a pretty empirical fact. That you find your superpower, man, you're set for life. But for sure, I think what we're really talking about here, and that's why it's kind of related to these ideas of like self-consciousness and self-doubt and the inner critic. One of the hallmarks, again, I came to learn about flow is that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, in other words, the inner chatter, the inner Woody Allen, that kind of like gets shut down. But you might think of that as like the superego. That's like socialization. That's like what's been taught. That's like the ways in which you've been inhibited into compliance. That's the part of you. It's like, I can't sing and dance. I look stupid, or I don't have a good body, or I'm not attractive, or I'm going to make a fool out of myself. And there's reasons to fear that kind of rejection because we are social beings. But
it's also important to some degree. I actually think it's part of the process of discovering your superpower is to let that super ego actually rise, have a period of time where it's like, okay, I understand. I'm actually really good at this, or I'm not so good at that. And then come back down to earth. It's almost like a good way to remove, okay, how do I have to behave at school or in an office or, at the mall or wherever it is in public? And can I now just step away from that into a different state,
and that's true. That's true. We shouldn't poo-poo on being socialized into compliance. Like, it's nice to be able to play dress up and go to a party and behave. I have a lot of friends who I adore, but who are so volatile because they're so rebellious in their nature against any kind of socialization that they're great to hang out with in the park, but you can't take them anywhere. and so, I'm not poo-pooing on being able to like inhibit yourself when necessary.
Yeah.
But there's another aspect of who you are, perhaps a more truthful, virginal, feral you that is more impulsive, that is more free, that is free not just of self-consciousness and the inner chatter, but free to act out its own creative impulses. And how do you unleash that fire hose, that manic geometry, the creativity of that intensity, of that feral intensity, without like going off the rails, crashing into people or things, because you can. And so what I'd like to create basically is an adult version of an inflatable castle. Why do little kids rent an inflatable castle for their birthday? Because finally they can run around and smash into walls and do somersaults and backflips and front flips, and you're not going to break your neck and you're not going to smash. So it's like very important. It's like, fuck, man, like you're safe in the adult inflatable castle. You create an adult inflatable castle, and it's like you can sing and dance in the nude. It's a cognitive slip and slide. And how fun to slide, to ride, to fly, like to enter that kind of subjective state, because not everything that is born of it is the most is a symphony, but you're in wavy waters, so to speak, and you want to make sure you're safe, because it's like, don't do stupid shit, Jamie Wheel said, and he's right. But if you can create a space where you can do stupid shit safely, the stupid shit can lead to the sublime. The profane and the sacred are often two sides of the same coin. And so it's like, so anyway, I create those containers as places that are, in some sense, my creative studio, but also places for me to purge. I purge in the container.
Yeah,
I extaculate all over myself, But
that's a great expression.
But sure, I mean,
it's real.
There's other. This is analogous to the idea that, like, okay, like when you're in bed, with your sexual partner, like you're naked, you're aroused, you're like playing with each other's body fluid, your identity is merging and disappearing into the other person. Maybe you're weeping. These things are not necessarily going to be acted out when you're riding the subway with a bunch of strangers. Like, everything requires a container. So have a bedroom and create an adult inflatable castle, for yourself as part of your creative dojo. And be disciplined about your ecstasy. Flaubert, he said something similar. He said, be disciplined and orderly in your life so that you can be violent and original in your work. And that's that.
I like that.
Me too.
I like that. I think that I love, and this is what I think people do not see online, is that part of the magic that you get to bring to the world, and part of your process is, like you said, that bouncy castle for adults. It's the environment that shapes everything around you that then allows you to have that different component. Now, one of the reasons I set up a podcast studio, one of the reasons I started podcasting is for two reasons. One is the selfish element of, I just want to talk to amazing people and I want to learn from amazing people. And I'm much more enthralled from the medium of video and from the medium of audio, because I can hear the emotion and I can see the emotion within whatever somebody's saying or creating, and I can feel where it kind of hurts, or I can feel where it makes them ecstatic, and all the different things. And that's part of why I think your methodology of making videos that are, perfect for Instagram, perfect for now TikTok and all these different forms, has shifted and grown and changed. Now, what I find fascinating, and this is something I told you 2 years ago, and this is where we literally manifested it here today, is that we're literally sitting in, a beautiful podcast studio. So I'm just going to go a little bit behind the scenes here.
Who's that cute girl?
That's Gloriana
Who's that?
over here. So we've got this beautiful studio with this nice stage, right? And I just want to show, that we've got cameras and we've got lights and we've got all these different components that enable this to now take form. Because I the way I see it is that we're using this gear, and you said this yesterday, we're electrifying, we're capturing
Totally.
an essence and a flow and a conversation, and at this point, a friendship, right? We're capturing and creating a medium where this studio and even these headsets create a little womb, a little cocoon, a little space. And that's why I knew that podcasting was going to be for you. Like I was like,
you did.
Okay, well I did. I do. I really truly did. Yeah. I was like, I see you going into CNCon at the beach or going, having a good conversation, going out for a bike ride, living an experience, coming back and saying, okay, now I want to capture it. Yeah. But I knew that if you had the cocoon, if you had the environment, if you had the simplicity of something like this setup using Cinemaker, which by the way, graciously supported us here.
I love Cinemaker. I love Cinemaker. I am using Cinemaker for my podcast. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Cinemaker.
Oh yeah, and we're able to just switch as we're talking. I mean, those who aren't seeing this, I'm literally switching as we speak. But the idea is that it creates that perfect womb. It is at home. Yeah. You turn on the lights. Everything's set up. Everything's wired. You just need to know a couple of little basic things. You can also call me in for support, and I'm sure I'll be supporting you for some time and working with you and helping you produce this. But then what I love about it is that it, unlike a video, when sometimes in the way you're creating, you have to start and then you have to flow, and you have to keep it going, and then sometimes you need a minute to think and pause or stop, or maybe somebody else brings something in. I think this is an evolution to that format for you. Yeah, because now you'll have more time and space to stop, to think, to kind of banter a little bit,
for sure,
and then halfway through a podcast, all of a sudden, there's that moment. There's that 30-second rant, that 2-minute thing, that piece, that flow state that now is engaged and enabled.
For sure, man. Thank you for sharing that. I think also this is a great way for me to learn to listen. And I pick up information everywhere, from books, from people, from TED Talks, and so on and so forth. But sometimes when someone is just talking to me, like looking me in the eyes and talking to me, I sometimes get directed attention fatigue, where it's like I might be entrained with them, and then a topic shifts, and all of a sudden I'm not so entrained, and I start to get anxious because I feel like, okay, I'm not tracking, or I am tracking. But I think that this is a way of just coming into a studio or a dojo of sorts and being like, take the pressure off. It's not a job interview. It's not even an interview. Totally. And just allow yourself to bear witness to another person, see what emerges from listening to them. And it'll just, I think it's going to, at least for me, create an opportunity for a faster feedback loop in some sense, where things will come out of both of our mouths that are completely emergent of these conditions, and these are different conditions than the conditions that I have been recording content for my career thus far.
Well, therefore, it's definitely different than Brain Games. We have to show up and do hair and makeup and this and that. There's a bunch of people behind the camera now. All of a sudden,
not my cup of tea.
Significantly more. Yes. That is scripted. That is going down a rabbit hole. That, I mean, you're I'm sure they're letting you flow a little bit. I'm curious about how much.
Very constricted flow.
I'm sure. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So you kind of have to, start here, get there, kind of thing, right? Like they determine at least the in points and out points, whereas here we're completely outside of that realm. And what I love, I love about your backstory around how you got into even making these videos and creating these stories, is, to me, this mimics more like that flow state with your friends. Because you could have your friends, like they can join on a Zoom call.
That's why I'm so excited.
They can chime in. We're obviously putting another mic over here.
I'm going to have my two best friends there, man. I cannot wait to recreate those hangs from Caracas, dude.
Yeah.
And it's going to be like that. And then, one of the things that I've always thought was interesting when Rogan first blew up, he sort of became the poster child for podcasting. But like, now he's so high profile and it's like serious guests and high profile people. But like really originally it was him and his comedian friends hanging out. And what I appreciate about that is it's the kind of the same ritual as us. It was like comedians shooting the shit, being silly with each other, being comedic with each other. And from that comedy, all kinds of creativity was born. I look forward to, in addition to some friends of mine that are high profile, but I look forward to pulling a kind of like Humans of New York vibe where I just grab somebody that isn't known publicly, but it's somebody who I adore, somebody who I think is a friend of mine who is playful and interesting. And then it's like, hey man, let's show the world how we hang. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And recreate that feeling of high school. I think it'll be very fun for me.
Well, and it's also you could bring on local superheroes, right? Like people who are everyday people who do amazing things.
Also,
like you introduced me. One of the places that you brought us to when we were biking around was this amazing kind of antique store. And you told me the story of this guy who basically, and then it was funny because when we walked in, the employee that was working there, the Englishman, sounds from England. He was all of a sudden he was like, my boss. He just sometimes he couldn't sleep at night. So he would wake up and he would just leave. And then he would call his wife 3 days later and he was like, I'm at a random barn somewhere in the middle of Poland.
Oh, he told you that story?
Yeah, he just told me the story. And then it's like, that's an amazing character of somebody who is going out treasure hunting, essentially, finding these unique pieces from all over the world and running an antique shop by just his curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're all chasing. We're all looking to find a way to allow the gap, and this is what I always say, the gap between record and publish needs to be as short as possible. But I'll add one more step that I think is now inspired by you, at least the way I think about it, is the gap between creativity and record has to be as short as possible. And also as like not controlled, but engineered outwardly so that inside that bouncy castle, now all of a sudden I have every capacity to think, to ponder, to flow, and then say, okay, I've got it. Bang, let's hit record on something and just move through it. And then where Cinemaker and all these other tools where this system comes into play is now I can record, and the second we're done, boom, I can hit publish. I can clip it. I can do all these other things. I can bring all these different components and layers into it.
No, I'm with you, and it's interesting that I started with salons that were podcast-like Friday nights in my house in Venezuela in high school. Eventually, my capturing content for me became a much more extroverted, out in the world. Like I want to go into hikes, I want to go into nature, because these places would like blow my mind, and then the exaltation prompted me into recording. Let's record the exaltation. And so people are getting a extaculation for sure. But what it's interesting about this is I think that it might not go as whoosh, it might not be as like manic in its transmissions, but instead it'll be deeper.
Yes.
Wider, more spacious. And so for people who have ever enjoyed what I've put out, it's kind of like, ooh, like this shows them in some ways the mind that produces those other videos.
It's behind the scenes.
Yeah, in a way.
And people like that.
People dig it. I think
right?
so.
Like if you're a fan of Will Smith, for example, or you're a fan of this person or that person, whoever it is, right? You kind of want to know more about how they became the character that they were in the movie, became the entrepreneur. Like I would love to know how Elon Musk thinks, or what does he wake up when he wakes up in the morning? Is he the kind of person who wants to eat breakfast or not? It sounds silly, but the more that we admire some of the people who have achieved things that we, that are interesting to me, I truly believe that the most interesting component is not what they've achieved. It's more about the way and the framework at which they think that got them there.
Well said. There's a line that was told multiple times, which is like, interesting people talking.
Yes.
Interesting people talking, dude, is great content. I mean, we've seen the success of podcasts, but like films like My Dinner with Andre or, Richard Linklater's Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight. These are films of just interesting people talking.
Yep.
Interesting people talking. I mean, how do I want to spend, what's my ideal day?
Yep.
A day walking around in nature with a very interesting friend talking. Interesting people talking. That's a very powerful thing. And you can sort of refine that idea, I take a lot of inspiration from the Edge Foundation. They have this log line. John Brockman created this, but the log line is to arrive at the edge of the world's knowledge, to gather the world's most interesting minds, to put them together in a room, and to have them ask each other the questions they've been asking themselves, which I just think is like, whew, mic drop.
Brilliant. So I've got a great question for you.
Okay.
I want your take on this.
Sure.
So you're talking about interesting people talking and
Yeah.
kind of this hive mind type scenario of,
Yeah.
two people jamming or multiple people jamming and coming together throughout space and time. There's been, some of the most important inventions are the print press, writing language, the shared language, all these different components. But today we are now at a precipice where I think it was last week or whatever it was, Google's Bard came out with it, which is AI. Obviously, everyone's heard of, or I don't want to say everyone, but many people have heard of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Fastest ever production, 0 to 10 million users, faster than anything and anyone ever.
Yeah.
We're clearly entering a different era, a different time and space.
Yep.
Are you worried in any way, shape, or form about AI? Are you concerned that somehow it might pull away from artistic expression?
I'm more
and
worried
even
about
the medium of it.
I'm worried about humans using AI in the wrong way. I mean, technology has this double-edged sword quality. You can use fire to cook your food or to burn the village. You can use the alphabet for rhapsodic poetry and encoding knowledge, or for hate speech propaganda. You can use social media to share meaningful ideas and empower people to have a voice, or it can be weaponized with fake news and so on and so forth. So, AI could be a step function in a new kind of capacity for human beings, of which the creative possibilities are currently what you might call the unknown, where we haven't even begun to imagine what will become possible. But it could go sour too, and people could engage with these tools in a way that has outcomes that are problematic, for sure. So I feel like there's very, very smart people trying to curtail that runaway effect. People like Tristan Harris, who I'm such a fan of. I just saw him speak at a conference, and
He's the guy behind the Social Network,
the Social Dilemma.
The Social Dilemma. Sorry,
Yeah,
yes.
we have friends in common, but I feel like the grown-ups, he represents to me like an example of like, okay, the grown-ups are in the room and they're going to figure this out and they understand where this could go hairy.
Yeah.
And then I see myself more as just like one of the artists, who's just like, the artist's role is to figure out how to use this tool or technology to make more beautiful art. And but thankfully, there's the grown-ups and there's the artists, and we're all playing around with this. What I'm not as interested in is the ones that are just fatalistic, where it's like they just think everything's going to hell and that's it. Let's just go into despair. It seems to me like unproductive.
Yeah, like part of me feels like we it's a natural evolution, number one, of the internet, but also of humanity.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, are we more likely to become transhumanistic, and have we not already? I mean, are we not using technology, phones? Even e-bikes are part of a form of, in the weirdest way, transhumanism.
We are totally transhuman.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're already there.
People who put on reading glasses are technological cyborgs.
Exactly.
They are a hybrid of biological and non-biological props and scaffoldings.
Yeah.
This podcast, and I kept using this very like cheesy analogy, but we're electrifying conversation right now. Like our words, our ideas, our little naked monkey noises, vibrations from our throat are being like electrified and digitized and amplified and distributed across the planet. Like, we are technology. I'm compelled by Kevin Kelly's notion of technology, the aggregate of all of our technology being kind of organismic. He calls it the technium. And he says the technium is the seventh kingdom of life, and subject to the same evolutionary forces as biological evolution. And in the end, the whole distinction between the born and the made is a human distinction that doesn't really apply. From the perspective of like the aliens, everything was born of the biosphere of the earth. You know, computers were born of biological processes and biological beings. You know, so the computers and trees, they're both nature, in my opinion. You know, so even the idea of transhumanism is more like a cultural way of like trying to offer like a context for us being this hybrid of what you might call the biological and the non-biological. But the non-biological that was made by the biological is still, in some sense, an extension of the biological. Because we made all this stuff. Yeah, exactly.
It's a natural progression of our reality. It's almost like a form of Darwinism, but now playing out in a technological way.
And doesn't take as long for interesting mutations to be adopted, for things to be useful, because there's a sense of what, call it consciousness, call it awareness. So it's more self-directed. It doesn't, the evolutionary process isn't just like a blind trial and error over billions of years anymore. It's happening in shorter and shorter timescales through self-directed action of conscious beings. And so it's going like that, like it's a logarithmic, exponential. Yeah,
no doubt. So I'll end with this last question, which is, we've talked a little bit about this new studio, this new space, this medium.
Grateful to you, bro.
And how from my perspective, I think it relates to the existing way that you currently make and share your stories, your thoughts, and your flow states, let's say. Tell us more a little bit about like where do you think your podcast is going? Why, what are you excited about when it comes to creating a podcast?
Thank you.
Anything related to that? I mean, it just, why you're excited about this studio, why you're excited to use
okay, so, I've avoided doing this because I feared fatigue and I feared burnout, and I felt like it's such a big commitment, but I've decided to take away all of that pressure. I'm not doing this oriented around how do I sell it, or how do I get a sponsor, or how do I get only high profile guests to boost the numbers. Like I'm going back to the roots of what Joe Rogan started doing with his pals, what I was doing in high school with my pals. Like I'm just looking forward to seeing what happens when I record some of the conversations that I have with the people that I find most compelling in the world, and seeing what those conversations look like when captured elegantly with a professional media scaffolding like this. And I suspect that when I watch those videos, just like I watched those videos in high school with me and my friends, I suspect that I will be very impressed with what I see. I suspect that I will see things in conversation that I didn't plan for, that I didn't conceive of, that I didn't imagine. And I think I'll be delightfully surprised by the emergent properties of the podcast. In other words, I'll be surprised not just by what comes out of my guests' mouths, but what comes out of my own mouth, which in turn will encourage me to be more free in my non-podcast life, to simply be more trusting of what emerges in the moment. So it'll be hopefully a practice of being in the moment as well. And, it's been an honor. This is our first recording together, and I know this is technically for your podcast, but maybe we can release some of these clips.
Oh, 100% we will.
Because this feels like the real first episode, even though it's technically on your podcast.
It's technically on all of them.
Yeah,
in
exactly. It feels like a shared one.
But what I want to
hopefully people get something out of it.
Oh, I'm sure, 100%. Yeah. But the one of the things that I've learned, actually, is a word that I learned from you, is the word suchness, right? So you just kind of described that idea of I'm going to be pleasantly surprised by the flow states and by the different virginal elements of conversation and different things that might come up as you're using this medium to express yourself, and then to publish it and allow others to kind of join on that journey.
Imagine what's going to happen. What's going to happen? Like, again, it's like people are going to get to be flies on the wall. In my own experience of the most electrifying conversations of my life. Like, and so if you place any value on my mind as a curatorial filter on the world, which I suppose that's what I do when I follow someone.
100%.
When I follow someone, what I'm saying is I'm invested in the filtering capacity of your curatorial mind. Yep. Anybody I follow on Instagram, anybody that I follow on Twitter, YouTubers like the Nerd Rider, I'm basically saying that anything you make, I want it to wash over me. I like how your mind processes the world. And I get a lot of value from investing in the curatorial authorship of minds I respect. In turn, anyone who feels that way about me, anyone who's ever liked my videos, anyone who likes the way the world comes out of my mouth, they will probably get a lot of value from this conversation. And I'm not doing it for them either, though. Like, I'm just doing this because I'm alive, but it's a really a wonderful blessing, like an icing on the cake, that my aliveness could be valuable to someone else. What a gift to sort of take care of yourself and somehow take care of others in some weird way.
Well, the way I see it is that you're capturing suchness.
Yes.
Can you just, like, for somebody who hears that word and is like, it's a kind of word that maybe somebody like kind of understands.
For sure.
But now I want to try and
let's define it.
Let's try and define that exactly. Like, how would you go about saying what suchness is?
So Aldous Huxley, who is the author of The Doors of Perception, he wrote an account of his experiences with the psychedelic compound known as mescaline, and he was a literate professorial figure. So his penmanship of the experience was just sublime, and that's a classic psychedelic text. In that book, he introduces the term suchness, and he was trying to get at the ineffability of the sort of aura of profundity in which objects were bathed when he was in the throngs of that psychedelic rapture. So he felt like he had entered a Platonic realm where objects and things, where the world was seen, again, in his words, in all of its suchness. So what does that mean? Well, imagine yourself in a state of deep, deep contemplation and deep, deep presence. Imagine it's a radiant afternoon. You're in a gorgeous natural environment. You're just in Eden. You're in the Garden of Eden. Maybe there's some music playing. You're just in this kind of dreamy mode, and everything is effervescent. And all of a sudden, on the water, you see a swan, glide by. Now, you're not just looking at a swan and dismissing it into the verbal association, like, oh, well, yeah, a swan, been there, done that, the been there's and seen that's of the adult mind. No, in this moment, as the swan crosses your visual field, it arrests your mind's attention. It hurls you into contemplation. You are seeing not just the swan, but the suchness of the swan, the essence of the swan, the Platonic, mythopoetic, archetypal realm in which swanness, the quality of swanness is born from. So it's a quality of attention that you bring to the world where things reveal themselves in all of their suchness. And when you're in that state, everything assumes the proportions of a miracle, and everything can be enjoyed with contemplative exactitude. And so to me, that is nourishing because it renders the world holy. And when the world is rendered holy, well, you're in the miraculousness of being, and you're definitely not bored or grumpy or depressed or anxious. You're simply moved, often to the point of tears, bathed in awe. Mm-hmm. All your maps and assumptions are obliterated, and you are gasping for air, compelled into aesthetic contemplation. And as F. Scott Fitzgerald said, face to face with something commensurate to your capacity for wonder. You're like Jodie Foster in the film Contact when she hurls into another dimension through the wormhole and she sees a celestial event, gets a tears in her eye and says, I had no idea. I had no idea. I had no idea. They should have sent a poet. It's just like, so suchness is a return to that, man. It's a return to the promised land. It's a return to aliveness and divinity and rhapsody and poetry and gratitude and grace. I mean, it's that, It's a nice antidote to our existential jadedness.
No, I definitely couldn't have put it better myself. Well, thank you for defining that. Thank you for setting up and doing this type of work over years. Because I recognize the art behind what you're doing.
Sure, thank you.
I recognize I'll say this. I recognize the suchness of how it was, how it is, and how it will be. Right? I see the miracle and all the tiny miracles that led to who you are, the character of who you are, as you were, as you are, and as you will be. And I think my role here is just to try and take this medium, these shorter versions of your suchness, and the shorter versions of your ability to express and capture with words the miracles that are existing of the world around us, and to enable everyone who I know is a fan of you, all the people who are around, or maybe the newest fans, the new people who are going to discover you as you get to go into the longer realms, the longer formats, and the longer forms of a podcast, of this medium in and of itself. Because to me, as I've said many times, the medium is the message. And I think that now, more than ever, as everyone is zagging towards the kind of like shorter, faster, like we need to make clips and keep people really interested in this stuff in a weird way, as everyone is zagging towards the type of videos that you've been making, if you can zig in the other direction now and start saying, well, you know what? Like, yeah, maybe you can have a nice little rant for 2 minutes or whatever it is, but now can you carry this conversation with the depth, the exactitude, with the capacity that you have, with all the books that I see in your space over here? I know that you're researched, and that's felt powerfully in a different format, in a different medium, in a longer format, in a different medium, that I think this is going to enable. So I'm excited for your podcast.
I want to cry, bro.
Yeah.
What the fuck, dude?
Yeah,
You're so beautiful, dude.
Oh, thank you.
What the fuck, man? God, thank you. No, seriously, because, how do I put this, man? I feel things very intensely, right? I'm very alive. I want to be very alive. I am alive. But sometimes being alive means I go off on these fucking rants, and I don't want to be suffocating to others. I don't want to suck the energy in the room. I don't want to, there's sometimes a feeling that like, well, let me hunch over a little bit so that I'm not off-putting. And I get that, we don't want someone else in our face all the time, And it's why I've gravitated towards like kind of smaller, more intimate spaces where I can be myself, because, maybe it's the complex of being a tall kid and already feeling like you stick out in some way, Maybe it's because I wasn't so comfortable in many social interactions, and so then I became more intellectually dominant in the classroom. Whatever it was, I had to find spaces where I could shine brightly without that being off-putting to others. So just to have someone who just has like so selflessly and generously empowered me in this way. I'm just not used to people like wanting to give me more power, like, and what I mean by that is just creative freedom.
Sure.
It's so, it's
feel
so
it's
beautiful.
My easiest way for me to support your art is, rather than saying, because I can't buy it, I can't capture it, I cannot put your art in a bottle and say, oh, this is mine now, or he made this video for me or with me, and I can participate in it. I can help you record it. I can do different things. But the biggest way that I can participate in it is give you another freedom, to create that bubble that you don't have to literally leave your house. You don't have to go on the bike ride. You don't have to cross the ferry. It doesn't have to be nice outside. It doesn't have to be cold. It doesn't have to be warm. It doesn't have to be any of those things.
Dude.
You don't need multiple people to do it.
Dude.
You could just turn on the lights, turn on the recording, and just go and flow. And just so for me, this really is the best gift that I can give you. And I'm honored to be able to share it with you. I'm honored to be able to give it.
I am so grateful.
Well,
and I really admire you. I had this realization yesterday about your superhero academy, and your connection to superheroes, and you were telling me your favorite superheroes. And in that moment, what was so beautiful to me was how alive your little boy was. Because my little boy is very alive too.
No kidding.
And there's nothing more tragic than men and women who have killed their inner child, or who have suffocated their inner child, or whose inner child was so diminished, so hurt,
Yeah.
that these people have created a persona built on artifice because they carry so much shame and self-loathing. And when I meet people who are alive in their inner child, it shows me their heart, and it makes me admire them even more. So thank you.
Well, my pleasure, and thank you so much for doing what you do. I'm excited for your podcast, for anybody listening to this.
They have to listen to this episode, God damn it.
Yeah, well, there's so much more coming. We don't know
Wow.
when it's coming. We don't even know all the details of all of these different things, but what we could tell you is it is coming.
Indeed.
We're excited about it. We're really excited to create this, and just really excited to call you better and better and better friend, and I'm excited to continue to play and continue to share my open heart with you in every way, and to share each other's superpowers with one another. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
All right.